panic makes you stupid. When the switchblade flashed in the dark, she didn't call the police. The cops in this city take 20 minutes just to dispatch, and she only had seconds. Instead, her bloody thumb mashed a desperate text to the only person she thought could help. "Help me." She hit send, praying her brother would wake up and answer. But the cracked screen made her slip. She got one digit wrong. The person who received it wasn't her brother. It was a man who owned the dark, and he was already on his way. Nora didn't believe in guardian angels. In this part of the city, angels wore Kevlar and charged an hourly rate. She pressed her spine against the cold, damp brick of the alleyway, the rough surface biting through her thin denim jacket. The smell of rotting cardboard and stale beer from the back doors of the Rusty Nail clogged her throat. 10 feet away, Dean flicked his switchblade open. The metallic snick echoed off the narrow walls, sharper than the distant sirens wailing across the river. "You're making this harder than it has to be, Nora," Dean said. His voice was a grating whine, thin and strung out. He shifted his weight, his worn sneakers splashing in a shallow puddle of questionable alley water. "Just give me the bag. Tommy owes me. If he ain't here to pay, you pay." "I don't have Tommy's money," Nora said. Her voice shook. She hated that it shook. "I haven't seen my brother in 3 weeks, Dean. You know that." Dean tilted his head, the sickly yellow light from a solitary street lamp catching the erratic twitch in his jaw. He was high. That was the worst part. If he were sober, she could reason with him. She could promise him cash on Friday. But a junkie chasing a debt didn't run on logic. He ran on desperation, and right now, his desperation was pointed directly at her ribs. "Check the bag," he muttered, taking a step forward. The blade caught the light. "Empty your pockets, now." Nora's right hand was buried deep in her coat pocket, her fingers wrapped tight around her phone. It was an old model, the glass heavily spider-webbed from when she'd dropped it on the subway stairs a month ago. Her heart hammered a violent, sickening rhythm against her sternum. The taste of copper flooded her mouth. She had bitten her cheek when Dean shoved her against the wall. She couldn't fight him. He was thin, but he was wired, and he had a knife. She needed Tommy. For all his faults, for all the gambling and the stupid debts, Tommy was big, and he was fiercely protective of her. He lived 5 blocks away. If she could just get him here. Slowly, keeping her eyes locked on Dean, she slid her thumb over the cracked screen in her pocket. She knew her phone by feel. Double tap to wake, swipe up, open the messaging app. Tommy's thread was pinned at the top. "I'm getting it," she lied, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Just give me a second." "Don't play games, Nora," Dean snapped, closing the distance to 5 feet. "Pull it out slow." Under the fabric of her coat, her thumb flew across the glass. "Help me. Alley behind Rusty Nail. Dean has knife. Plows." She felt the jagged edge of the cracked glass bite into her thumb. A sharp sting, a drop of blood smearing across the display. She fumbled. Her thumb slipped, hitting the top right of the screen where she had just tapped the contact name. She didn't realize it, but the smear of blood had triggered a tap on a different thread, an unsaved number that had texted her a wrong number spam link yesterday. She hit send. The phone vibrated softly, confirming the message was out in the ether. "Hands out!" Dean yelled, suddenly lunging forward. He grabbed her left arm, his grip bruising, and yanked her away from the wall. Nora stumbled, her knees hitting the wet asphalt. The phone slipped from her pocket, clattering onto the ground, landing face up. The screen glowed dimly, illuminating a tiny puddle. Dean kicked the phone away. It slid toward a rusted dumpster. "Stupid bitch," He spat. He dragged her up by her collar, the point of the switchblade pressing uncomfortably close to the soft skin just under her jaw. "Think you're calling the cops? They don't come down here. Not for people like us." Nora closed her eyes, the cold rain beginning to spit from the black sky above. She focused on her breathing. "Tommy will come," she told herself. "He always checks his phone. He'll come." But as the seconds ticked by, agonizing and slow, the reality of the alley closed in on her. The damp chill seeped into her bones. Dean's erratic breathing fanned across her face, smelling of cheap tobacco and decay. He patted her down with his free hand, roughly yanking her canvas bag from her shoulder and dumping its contents onto the wet pavement. Lipstick, a half-empty pack of gum, keys, and an old leather wallet spilled out. Dean snatched the wallet, flipping it open. $30, he screamed, his voice cracking. 30 miserable bucks. Your brother owes me $3,000. That's all I have, Nora cried out, tears finally breaking through. I swear to God, Dean, I don't have it. Dean threw the wallet at the wall. It smacked against the brick and fell into the mud. He turned his attention back to her, his eyes wild, the knife trembling in his hand. He was calculating the math in his head, how much he needed, how angry his own dealers were, and what she was worth. "Maybe I just take it out of your hide," he whispered, pressing the flat of the blade against her cheek. Nora squeezed her eyes shut. She waited for the pain. She waited for Tommy. She waited for a miracle, but down by the dumpster, her discarded phone buzzed once. A read receipt. Someone had seen the message. 5 miles away, in the soundproof back room of a high-end import warehouse, Roman Rossi sat perfectly still. The room smelled of stale cigar smoke, expensive leather, and fear. Mostly fear. The man kneeling on the plastic tarp in front of Roman's desk was sweating through his suit, babbling a string of excuses that Roman stopped listening to 10 minutes ago. Roman was 34, but his eyes looked much older. They were a flat, unforgiving slate grey. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. He wore a charcoal suit that was tailored with mathematical precision, and his posture was relaxed, elbows resting on the polished mahogany desk. "Carmine," Roman said softly, interrupting the kneeling man's frantic apologies. The large man standing by the door shifted his weight. "Yeah, boss. He's giving me a headache. Finish it." Roman didn't watch as Carmine stepped forward. He simply picked up his private phone, a secure, encrypted device he only used for unsanctioned business. It had vibrated twice in the last minute. He unlocked the screen. There was a message from an unknown number. "Help me. Alley behind Rusty Nail. Dean has knife. Plus." Roman stared at the glowing letters. He didn't know a Dean. He didn't know the number. The Rusty Nail, however, was a rundown dive bar on the edge of his territory. It was a place where bottom feeders drank cheap liquor and traded stolen copper wire. Logically, it was a wrong number, a desperate plea sent into the void by mistake. Roman was a pragmatic man. He dealt in shipping lanes, union contracts, and the silent removal of obstacles. He did not play superhero for street rats. He moved his thumb to delete the thread. "Please," Roman paused. The sheer, unvarnished panic in those 3 letters snagged something buried deep in his chest. A memory he preferred to keep drowned in expensive scotch. He looked at the timestamp. Delivered 2 minutes ago. He stood up. The scraping of his chair silenced the room. Carmine looked back, confused. "Boss?" Roman slipped the phone into his inside breast pocket and buttoned his jacket. "Get the car. We ain't done here," Carmine said, gesturing to the man on the tarp. "Put him in the freezer. We're taking a ride, the South End." 3 minutes later, two black SUVs tore out of the warehouse bay, their tires screaming against the wet pavement. Roman sat in the back of the lead vehicle, watching the city blur past through tinted glass. He didn't know why he was doing this. It was reckless. It was a waste of time. But a cold, tight anger was uncoiling in his stomach. The drive took 7 minutes. They hit the alleyway behind the Rusty Nail without cutting their headlights. The high beams sliced through the darkness like physical blades, illuminating the rain, the garbage, and the two figures by the brick wall. The SUVs didn't just park, they boxed the alley in. The engines rumbled with a heavy, menacing bass. In the blinding glare of the headlights, Nora threw her hands up over her eyes. Dean froze like a deer caught in the path of a speeding freight train. He kept his grip on Nora's collar, but the switchblade in his hand suddenly looked like a child's toy against the armored grills of the trucks. The doors of the lead SUV opened. 4 men stepped out into the rain. They didn't run. They didn't shout. They moved with the synchronized, terrifying calm of apex predators. They wore dark coats, and the way they held themselves made it very clear that they were heavily armed. Then the back door of the first vehicle opened, and Roman stepped out. The rain hit his shoulders, but he didn't flinch. He walked past his men, his leather shoes clicking sharply on the asphalt. He stopped 10 feet from Dean. The silence in the alley was absolute, broken only by the steady idle of the engines and the patter of rain. Roman looked at Nora. She was trembling, soaking wet, her cheek bruised, a thin line of blood running down her forehead. She looked terrified, but beneath the fear, he saw confusion. She didn't know him. Roman's gaze shifted to Dean. The grey eyes went dead. "You have 3 seconds to drop the knife," Roman said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the rain with the weight of an anvil. "If you make it to 4, I'll have Carmine cut off your hands and feed them to the stray dogs." Dean's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The drugs in his system warred with basic survival instinct. He looked at the 4 men flanking Roman. He looked at the tailored suit, the cold eyes, the sheer, suffocating aura of power radiating from the man in front of him. The switchblade clattered onto the wet pavement. Dean let go of Nora and took a frantic step back, hitting the brick wall. "Hey, man," he stammered, raising his empty hands. "I don't want no trouble. This is just a misunderstanding. She owes me." Roman didn't blink. Carmine. Before Dean could take another breath, Carmine crossed the distance, grabbed the scrawny man by the throat, and slammed his head against the brick wall. Dean crumpled to the ground, instantly unconscious. Nora stood frozen, her chest heaving. She looked at the man bleeding on the ground, then slowly raised her eyes to the stranger in the charcoal suit. He was staring at her, his expression unreadable. He reached into his jacket, pulling out his phone. "You sent a text," Roman said, his voice dropping an octave, softening just a fraction as he looked at her bruised face. "I believe you had the wrong number." Nora stared at the cracked screen of the phone in Roman's hand. The glass was shattered, the light flickering under the steady assault of the rain. It took her brain a long, agonizing moment to process his words. "I believe you had the wrong number." She looked from the phone to his face. The cold grey eyes were analyzing her, dissecting her reaction. He wasn't breathing heavily. He wasn't agitated by the violence that had just unfolded. He looked mildly bored, like a man who had been interrupted during a decent dinner. Down on the pavement, Dean groaned. It was a wet, pathetic sound. Carmine kicked him in the ribs, a sharp, practiced strike that snapped Dean's jaw shut and sent him back into unconsciousness. Nora flinched. stepping back until her shoulder blades hit the rough brick wall. Her chest heaved. The adrenaline was leaving her system, and the cold was rushing in to take its place. She was shivering violently. Her wet jeans clung to her legs, and the thin denim jacket offered zero protection against the autumn chill. Nora started, her voice raspy. She swallowed hard, tasting blood from her bitten cheek. I was trying to text my brother. Roman lowered the phone. He didn't hand it back. He slipped it into his jacket pocket. Your brother is not here. I know. Who does he owe? The question was blunt. No preamble. No checking to see if she needed an ambulance. He was dissecting the problem. I don't know, Nora lied. It was a reflex. You didn't give up names on the street, especially not to men who arrived in armored convoys. Roman tilted his head. The faint neon light from the street illuminated the sharp angles of his jaw. You are freezing, bleeding, and standing next to a junkie who just tried to open your throat for $3,000. Lying to me is the least productive thing you can do right now. He turned away from her, looking at Carmine. Toss him in the dumpster. If he wakes up before the garbage truck comes, it's his lucky day. Carmine grunted, grabbing Dean by the collar of his soggy coat. He dragged the limp body toward the rusted metal bin at the end of the alley. The sound of Dean's shoes scraping against the asphalt made Nora's stomach turn. Get in the car, Roman said. It wasn't a request. It was a flat directive. Nora's survival instincts, dormant during the attack, suddenly flared to life. No, thank you for stopping him, but I'm going home. She took a step toward the street, keeping a wide berth around the idling SUV. Two of the men in dark coats shifted, subtly blocking her path. They didn't reach for their weapons. They just formed a wall of solid muscle and tailored wool. Roman didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look at her as he walked toward the open door of the vehicle. You live 5 blocks from here. It is past midnight. You have no money, your phone is in my pocket, and the people your brother owes are still looking for him. If I leave you here, you will be dead or sold by morning. He stopped at the door, resting a hand on the roof of the SUV. He looked back at her over his shoulder. I do not repeat myself. Get in the car. Nora looked at the 2 men blocking the exit. She looked at Carmine, who was slamming the heavy lid of the dumpster shut. Finally, she looked at the dark interior of the vehicle. She was a cynic. She knew how the world worked. Men like this didn't save girls like her out of the goodness of their hearts. They collected debts. They owned things. By getting into that car, she was trading a $3,000 street debt for something far more expensive. But she was so cold, and she was tired of fighting. She walked past the men, her wet sneakers squelching, and climbed into the back seat. Roman slid in beside her, and the heavy door slammed shut, sealing them in absolute silence. The soundproofing was incredible. The roar of the rain and the rumble of the city vanished, replaced by the faint hum of the engine and the smell of rich, untouched leather. The air conditioning was warm and dry. The driver put the car in gear. The convoy began to move, pulling out of the alley and into the slick, rain-washed streets. Nora pressed herself against the opposite door, hugging her knees to her chest. She left a damp patch on the pristine leather, and mud flaked off her shoes onto the floor mats. She felt entirely out of place, a piece of trash dragged into a vault. Roman pulled a clean, white linen handkerchief from his breast pocket and held it out to her. She stared at it. Your forehead is bleeding, he said. She hesitated, then took it. Her fingers brushed his. His skin was warm. The handkerchief smelled faintly of cedar and expensive soap. She pressed it against the cut near her hairline, wincing at the sting. What's your name? He asked. He was looking out the window, watching the neon signs bleed past the tinted glass. Nora. Your brother's name. Tommy. Roman pulled his own phone, the encrypted one, from his pocket. He tapped a few keys, holding it to his ear. Vincent, Roman said quietly. Find a Tommy. Operates in the South End. Runs a $3,000 deficit with street-level dealers. Find out who holds his paper. He hung up, dropping the phone back into his pocket. He finally turned his head to look at her. The grey eyes were entirely devoid of pity. Where are we going? Nora asked, her voice small. To fix a mistake, Roman replied. The SUV descended into a private, brightly lit underground parking garage. There were no other cars around, just a row of concrete pillars and a heavy steel door leading to a private elevator. The doors of the vehicle opened. The men stepped out first, securing the perimeter out of pure habit. Roman exited on his side, buttoning his jacket with a swift, fluid motion. He didn't wait for Nora. He simply started walking toward the steel doors. Nora scrambled out, her stiff, cold joints protesting. She followed him, keeping her head down, intensely aware of Carmine's heavy footsteps right behind her. The elevator ride was silent and fast. Her ears popped. When the doors slid open, they stepped directly into a massive, open-plan penthouse. Nora stopped dead in her tracks. She had never seen anything like it. The floor was dark, polished hardwood. The walls were mostly glass, offering a panoramic, dizzying view of the city skyline. The rain lashed against the windows, but inside it was a fortress of quiet wealth. Minimalist furniture. Abstract art that probably cost more than Nora would make in a lifetime. She suddenly felt painfully aware of the dirt under her fingernails, the tear in her jeans, and the smell of alley water clinging to her jacket. Carmine, Roman said, tossing his keys onto a glass entry table. Get Miller. Tell him to bring a kit. Sure, boss. Carmine peeled off toward a hallway in the back. Roman took off his suit jacket, draped it over the back of a charcoal sofa, and unbuttoned his cuffs. He rolled the white sleeves up to his elbows. He had scars on his forearms, old ones, faded white lines cutting across thick muscle. He walked over to a wet bar, poured an amber liquid into a heavy crystal glass, and turned to face her. Sit, he commanded, pointing to a leather armchair near the window. Nora didn't move. I'm going to ruin the chair. Roman paused, the glass halfway to his mouth. A microscopic twitch at the corner of his lips was the closest thing to a smile she had seen from him. It is cowhide. It will survive. Sit down before you fall down. Her knees were shaking. She walked over and sank into the chair. It swallowed her. A moment later, an older man with greying hair and wire-rimmed glasses walked into the room carrying a black medical bag. He wore a rumpled button-down shirt and looked like he had been woken up from a deep sleep. Miller, Roman said, taking a sip of his drink. Check her head. Make sure she doesn't have a concussion. Miller nodded, pulling up a small stool in front of Nora. He didn't ask questions. He opened his bag, pulled out a penlight, and shined it into her eyes. He checked the cut on her forehead, cleaning it with an antiseptic wipe that burned like fire. Nora hissed, gripping the armrests. Superficial, Miller muttered. He applied a thin butterfly bandage to the cut. He checked her jaw where Dean had grabbed her, his fingers probing gently for fractures. Bruising. No breaks. She's in shock, though. Needs dry clothes and sugar. Thank you, Miller. Go back to sleep, Roman said. The doctor packed his bag and vanished down the hallway without a word. Roman walked over and set his glass down on a small side table next to Nora. He leaned against the glass window, looking down at her. Drink, he said. Nora looked at the amber liquid. I don't drink. It's not a party, Nora. It's for your nerves. Drink it. She picked up the heavy crystal. The liquor burned her throat, sending a sudden sharp spike of heat down into her freezing stomach. She coughed, watering eyes glaring up at him. "Who are you?" she asked, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. "My name is Roman Rossi." Nora's breath hitched. The glass in her hand trembled. Even in the gutters of the South End, you knew the name Rossi. They didn't run the petty street corners. They ran the docks. They ran the unions. They were the invisible architecture of the city's criminal underworld. You didn't cross them, you didn't speak to them, and you certainly didn't text them for help. Nora stammered, the reality of her situation crashing down on her with the weight of a collapsing building. "I texted you." "You texted a burner number I use for international logistics," Roman corrected. "A number that received a spam message yesterday, which I assume is how it ended up in your phone." "I was trying to reach Tommy. The screen is broken. My thumb slipped." "Your thumb slipped," Roman repeated. He looked out the window at the city lights. "A slip of the thumb brought me to a filthy alley to pull a knife away from a junkie." He turned his gaze back to her. It was heavy, suffocating. "Do you know how the world works, Nora?" "I know I owe you," she whispered, her voice cracking. "But I don't have money. If Tommy owes $3,000, I can't pay that. I work at a diner. I can barely make rent." Roman's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, read the screen, and slid it back. "Tommy doesn't owe $3,000, Roman said flatly. "Tommy owes $25,000 to a bookie named Sal. Sal got tired of waiting and sold the debt to the local dealers in your neighborhood for pennies on the dollar. That's why the junkie was after you." Nora felt the blood drain from her face. 25,000. It might as well have been 1,000,000. "He's an idiot," she whispered, tears finally spilling over her lashes. "He's an idiot and he's going to get us killed." "No," Roman said. He stepped away from the window, closing the distance between them. He stood over her chair, casting a long shadow that blocked out the overhead lights. "No," she echoed, looking up at him. "Sal operates on my docks. I just bought the debt." Nora froze. The heat from the liquor vanished. "Why?" Roman looked down at her, at the dirt on her face, the blood on her hairline, the terrified defiance in her dark eyes. He didn't know why. He never acted on impulse. But the panic in that text message had pulled him out of his warehouse. And now that she was here, sitting in his chair, bleeding on his rug, a dark, territorial instinct had settled in his chest. "Because," Roman said softly, his voice a dangerous rumble, "you don't belong to Tommy anymore. You belong to me." The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. "You belong to me." Nora didn't gasp. She didn't faint. Growing up in the South End burned the melodrama out of you early. Instead, a cold, hard knot of pure cynicism tightened in her stomach. She stared at the man standing over her, taking in the cut of his suit, the shadow of his jaw, and the absolute lack of hesitation in his eyes. She let out a short, hollow laugh. It scraped against her dry throat. "I'm not a car," Nora said. Her voice was barely a rasp, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "You can't buy me. You can buy a piece of paper with my brother's name on it, but you don't own me." Roman didn't move. He didn't look offended by her defiance. If anything, the flat grey of his eyes sharpened, just a fraction. "In my world, Nora, everything has a price tag. You just found out yours. I make $14 an hour pouring burnt coffee at a diner," she shot back, gripping the leather armrests of the chair until her knuckles turned white. "I live in a one-bedroom walk-up with a busted radiator. I have $30 to my name, which your junkie currently has in his pocket. If you're looking for a return on a $25,000 investment, you made a very bad trade. I don't make bad trades. Roman stepped back, creating a few inches of space between them. It allowed Nora to breathe. He picked up his empty glass from the side table and walked back to the wet bar. You think I want your diner tips? You think I brought you here to balance Sal's books? Then what do you want? I want you to survive the night, Roman said, his back to her as he poured a small measure of water. He drank it, set the glass down, and turned around. Sal's guys don't care about your hourly wage. They care about sending a message. If I let you walk out that door right now, you will be dead before sunrise. Tommy is a ghost. You are the collateral. Nora's chest tightened. The residual adrenaline from the alley was completely gone, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. She knew he was right. Sal was notorious. He didn't write off bad debts. He made examples of them. So if I stay here, she said, her voice dropping, the fight draining out of her. As a hostage. As a guest, Roman corrected smoothly. Hostages are kept in basements. You will take the guest suite down the hall. Tomorrow, I will find Tommy. Once I have him, we will discuss how you pay me back. And if I say no? If I walk to that elevator right now? Roman gestured toward the steel doors across the sprawling living room. The elevator is unlocked. The lobby doors are open. You are free to walk out into the rain. But understand this. If you leave this penthouse, the Rossi family protection does not follow you. You take your chances with Sal. He wasn't trapping her. He was handing her a choice, knowing full well there was only one logical option. It was a brutal, elegant kind of manipulation. Nora looked at the elevator. She pictured the dark, wet streets. She pictured Dean's knife. She didn't move. Smart, Roman murmured. He walked past her towards the hallway. Clara! A woman in her late 50s appeared from a side door near the kitchen. She wore a simple dark dress and had her hair pulled back into a severe bun. Her face was lined, but her eyes were sharp. Yes, Mr. Rossi. Put her in the East Suite. Find her some dry clothes. If she needs a doctor again, wake Miller. Roman didn't look back at Nora as he issued the orders. Good night, Nora. He disappeared into a set of double doors at the far end of the hall. The heavy oak clicked shut, leaving a resonant silence in the massive apartment. Come, Clara said. Her voice wasn't unkind, but it wasn't warm either. It was strictly professional. Nora stood up, her joints popping. Her wet jeans were stiff, her jacket smelling strongly of garbage and fear. She followed Clara down a wide corridor lined with framed black and white photographs of a city that looked decades older than the one outside. Clara opened a door on the right. The East Suite was larger than Nora's entire apartment. A massive king-sized bed sat in the center, covered in a slate-grey duvet. Floor-to-ceiling windows mirrored the living room, looking out over the glittering, rain-soaked skyline. A door to the left revealed a bathroom clad in dark marble. The shower is through there, Clara said, stepping into the room to turn on a bedside lamp. Towels are on the rack. I will leave some clean clothes on the bed. They will be large on you, but they are dry. Thank you, Nora whispered. Clara paused at the door, looking at the bruised, shivering girl. A flicker of something, pity perhaps, crossed her stern features. Lock the door if it makes you feel better, but no one will hurt you here. He wouldn't allow it. Clara closed the door, leaving Nora completely alone. Nora didn't lock the door. A lock wouldn't stop men like Roman Rossi. She walked into the bathroom, peeled off her ruined clothes, and stepped into the shower. The water was scalding, a shocking contrast to the freezing alley. She leaned her head against the marble tile, and watched the dirty, rust-colored water swirl down the drain. She scrubbed her skin until it was red, trying to wash off the smell of the alley, the memory of the switchblade, and the heavy, terrifying weight of Roman's gaze. She belonged to him. She didn't know what it meant yet, but as she stood in his shower, in his fortress in the sky, she knew her old life was dead. Morning broke over the city in streaks of pale, bruised purple. Nora woke up with a violent start, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was tangled in expensive sheets, the fabric softer than anything she had ever felt. It took her a full 10 seconds to remember where she was. The penthouse, Roman Rossi, the debt. She sat up, wincing as a dull ache radiated from her jaw and forehead. She touched the butterfly bandage near her hairline. It held. On the chair near the window, Clara had left folded clothes, a pair of black sweatpants and a thick, oversized grey cashmere sweater. Nora put them on. The sweater smelled faintly of cedar and cold air. It smelled like him. She rolled the sleeves up past her wrists and walked out into the hallway. The penthouse looked different in the daylight, less like a villain's lair and more like a sterile, high-end corporate office. The storm had passed, leaving the sky a bright, glaring white. She walked into the living room. Roman was sitting at a massive glass dining table. He was wearing a crisp white shirt, the top 2 buttons undone, sleeves rolled up, revealing the pale scars on his forearms. A laptop was open in front of him, next to a stack of thick ledgers and a cup of black coffee. He didn't look up from the screen as she approached. "There is coffee in the kitchen. Eat something." Nora ignored the kitchen. She stopped a few feet from the table, crossing her arms over her chest. The cashmere was warm, a small comfort. "You said you would find Tommy," she said. Her voice was steadier today. The sleep had helped. Roman hit a key on his laptop, closing a spreadsheet. He finally looked up. His eyes were entirely unreadable in the morning light. "I did." Before Nora could ask where he was, the private elevator chimed. The heavy steel doors slid open. Carmine stepped out first. He looked exactly as he had the night before. Massive, unbothered, dangerous. Behind him, 2 other men hauled a struggling figure out of the metal box. "Let go of me. I swear to God, I'll kill you." It was Tommy. Nora gasped, taking a step forward. "Tommy!" Her brother looked terrible. His left eye was swollen completely shut. His lip was split wide open, and his shirt was torn. He smelled of stale beer and copper. He was thrashing against the 2 guards, but they held him effortlessly. When Tommy heard Nora's voice, he stopped fighting. He looked at her, his good eye widening in shock. "Nora, what are you doing here? Are you okay? Did they hurt you?" He tried to lunge toward her, but Carmine casually planted a heavy hand on Tommy's chest, shoving him back. Tommy stumbled and fell to his knees on the hardwood floor. "Don't touch him," Nora yelled, stepping toward Carmine. "Nora, stop!" Roman's voice was quiet, but it commanded the room instantly. Nora froze. Roman closed his laptop. He picked up his coffee cup, took a slow sip, and set it down. He looked at Tommy kneeling on the floor. "Thomas," Roman said mildly, "you are bleeding on my floor." Tommy looked up. His expression shifted from confusion to pure terror as his brain caught up with his surroundings. He looked at the guards, at the sprawling penthouse, and finally at the man sitting at the table. He knew exactly who Roman was. Every low-level hustler in the city did. "Mr. Rossi," Tommy stammered, the fight instantly evaporating from his body. I don't operate on your docks, I swear. I don't know why I'm here." "You are here," Roman said, resting his elbows on the table and steepling his fingers. Because you owe Sal $25,000. And because Sal got impatient, he sold your marker to the street rats in the South End. Rats who cornered your sister in an alley last night with a knife. Tommy's good eye snapped to Nora. He saw the bandage on her forehead, the dark bruise blooming on her jaw. Nora, they got to you. Dean tried, Nora said, her voice trembling with a mixture of relief and absolute fury. Because of you, Tommy, because you disappeared again. Tommy looked back at Roman, desperation making his voice crack. I'll pay it. I have a line on a job. 2 weeks, Mr. Rossi. I'll have the 25. You don't have 25 cents, Roman said, cutting through the lie with surgical precision. You are a gambler and a liability. I bought your debt from Sal at a premium. Why? Tommy asked, echoing Nora's question from the night before. Roman looked past Tommy, his gaze locking onto Nora. For a second, the cold professionalism fractured, revealing something dark and possessive underneath. Because I wanted the collateral, Roman said. Tommy stared at Roman, then at Nora in the oversized cashmere sweater. The reality of the transaction hit him. He scrambled to his feet, a sudden, desperate surge of protective anger overtaking his fear. No, no way. You take me, break my legs, put me to work on the docks. You don't touch her. Carmine stepped forward to put Tommy back on the ground, but Roman raised a hand. Carmine stopped. Roman stood up. He walked around the glass table, his footsteps silent on the hardwood. He stopped 2 feet from Tommy. He wasn't much taller than Nora's brother, but his presence swallowed the space. You don't negotiate, Thomas. You have no leverage, Roman said, his voice a low, lethal hum. You left her unprotected. You made her a target. You forfeited your right to play the protective brother the moment you placed that last bet. Roman reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. He tossed it onto the floor at Tommy's feet. Your debt is 0. There is $5,000 in that envelope. You are going to pick it up, walk into that elevator, and take a bus out of this city. You will never contact Nora again. You will never set foot in my territory again. If I see your face, if I hear your name, I will put you in the ground. Tommy stared at the envelope, then at his sister. Nora. He's offering you your life, Roman interrupted. Take it and leave. Nora felt tears burning the back of her eyes. Tommy was a disaster, a walking ruin of a man, but he was the only family she had left. She wanted to scream, to run to him, but she looked at the cold, immovable wall that was Roman Rossi. Tommy slowly bent down. His hands were shaking as he picked up the envelope. He looked at Nora one last time. There was shame in his eyes, heavy and suffocating. I'm sorry, kid, Tommy whispered. He turned around and walked into the elevator. The steel doors closed, sealing him away. Nora stood perfectly still, a tear finally escaping and tracing a hot path down her bruised cheek. She was alone, truly, terrifyingly alone. Roman turned to face her. He didn't offer a handkerchief this time. He just watched her. He's gone, Roman said, his voice entirely void of emotion. Now, we discuss your debt. The heavy steel doors of the elevator clicked shut, leaving a profound, suffocating silence in their wake. Nora stared at the polished metal. Tommy was gone. Her brother, her only anchor in the city, had taken $5,000 and walked away without looking back. She didn't know whether to scream or collapse. Roman didn't give her time to do either. Sit down, he said. He walked back to the glass dining table and pulled out a chair opposite his own. Nora turned to him. The tears that had threatened to fall dried up, replaced by a cold, hollow clarity. The worst had happened. She was a piece of collateral in a game she didn't know how to play, stranded in the penthouse of a man who commanded killers. The panic was gone. Now it was just math. Survival math. She walked over and sat down. The cashmere sweater felt heavy on her shoulders. Roman poured a cup of black coffee from a silver carafe and slid it across the glass surface toward her. He sat down, steepled his fingers, and watched her. $25,000, Nora said, her voice completely flat. I don't have it. I don't have assets. If you sell my organs on the black market, you might break even. But I assume that's not your business model. A faint, humorless smile touched the corners of Roman's mouth. I deal in shipping, Nora. Organs spoil too quickly. Then what is this? She gestured around the immaculate room, at the skyline outside, at him. Why am I here? Don't tell me it's because I belong to you. I'm not a pet. If you want a slave, you picked the wrong girl. I'll throw myself off that balcony before I let you turn me into a toy. Roman's eyes darkened, the slate grey shifting into something sharper. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. The sleeves of his white shirt tightened against thick muscle. If I wanted a toy, I would buy one, Roman said, his voice dropping to a low, even timbre that demanded absolute attention. I don't keep company with women who have to be coerced into my bed. Put that fear away. It insults both of us. Nora blinked, thrown slightly off balance. Then what? I am transitioning a significant portion of my capital into legitimate enterprises, Roman explained, his tone shifting into something strictly corporate. Real estate, high-end art galleries, commercial development in the North End. The problem with legitimate business is that the paper trail must be pristine. My usual associates cannot manage these properties. They have records. They have faces known to the state police. I need a ghost. Nora stared at him over the rim of the coffee cup. You want me to run your fronts? I want you to manage the legitimate books, he corrected. You have no criminal record. You have no ties to my family. On paper, you are a working-class girl from the South End who just landed a job as a logistics coordinator for Rossi Enterprises. You will oversee the accounts for the galleries. You will interface with the contractors. You will be the clean face of my clean money. I pour coffee at a diner, Roman. I don't know anything about commercial development or art. You know how to count, Roman said bluntly. You know when someone is lying to you. And in the alley last night, with a junkie holding a knife to your throat, you didn't scream. You didn't beg. You kept your head and you made a play. I can teach you real estate. I cannot teach nerve. Nora absorbed the words. It was a job offer. A deeply illegal, terrifying job offer, dressed up in corporate terminology. But it was a way out of the dark. How long? She asked. Your salary will be $80,000 a year, Roman said, not missing a beat. You will live here, in the guest suite. Room and board are covered. We will deduct 20% of your net pay each month to service the $25,000 debt. When the debt is zero, you are free to walk away, or renegotiate. Nora did the math in her head. A little over a year and a half. Why do I have to live here? Because Sal's men are still on the street. Word will get out that I bought Tommy's paper and kept you. Until you are established under my protection, your apartment in the South End is a liability. I do not leave my investments unguarded. It made a twisted kind of sense. It was practical. If I do this, Nora said, sitting up straighter, her dark eyes locking onto his grey ones, I am an employee, not property. You don't own me, Roman. You own my time between 9 and 5. Roman watched her. For the first time since he pulled her out of the rain, he saw the real Nora. Strip away the dirt, the blood, and the panic, and she was steel. Brittle, maybe, but steel nonetheless. "Agreed," Roman said softly. "And I want a contract," she demanded. "In writing. The terms of the debt, the repayment schedule, and my salary." Roman let out a short, genuine laugh. It was a startling sound, rough and surprisingly warm. It changed the entire geography of his face. "You want a legally binding contract for a mob debt? I want proof that this isn't a trap." He looked at her for a long moment, the amusement fading back into a calculating intensity. "Fine, you'll have it by noon. Drink your coffee, Nora. Clara will take you shopping for office clothes at 1. He stood up, taking his laptop, and walked toward his office. Nora sat alone at the massive table. Her hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't from cold or fear. It was from the sudden, terrifying realization that she had just signed a deal with the devil, and she was actually looking forward to the work. 5 weeks later, the oversized cashmere sweater was packed away. Nora stood in the penthouse living room wearing a sharp, charcoal-grey blazer and tailored black trousers. She held a tablet in her left hand, scrolling through the monthly invoices for the gallery opening in the North End. It was 2 a.m. The penthouse was silent, save for the relentless drumming of rain against the floor-to-ceiling glass. Nora couldn't sleep. The numbers on the catering invoice didn't match the initial quote, and she was too stubborn to leave it for the morning. She had spent the last 5 weeks burying herself in Roman's legitimate businesses. She was good at it. She was meticulous, relentless, and completely unafraid of haggling with contractors who thought they could overcharge the new girl. She heard the heavy click of the elevator doors unlocking. Nora looked up, frowning. Roman rarely came back this late, and when he did, he usually went straight to his wing. The steel doors slid open. Roman stepped out, but he didn't walk with his usual precise, predatory grace. He leaned heavily against the metal frame. He was alone. No Carmine, no guards. Nora set the tablet down on the glass table. "Roman?" He didn't answer. He took 2 steps into the room, his black trench coat dripping water onto the pristine hardwood floor. He pulled his right hand out of his pocket. It was completely covered in blood, thick, dark, and wet. Nora's breath caught in her throat. She didn't freeze. The South End reflexes kicked in. She crossed the room in a sprint, catching him just as his knees buckled. He was heavy, solid muscle and dead weight. She grunted, wrapping her arm around his waist, hauling him up. He smelled of rain, copper, and the sharp, chemical burn of gunpowder. "Miller," Roman grated out, his voice a wet rasp. He kept his left hand pressed tightly against his side, just under his ribs. "Clara's not here. It's Thursday," Nora said, her voice tight but remarkably steady. She dragged him toward the leather sofa, the same one he had forbidden her from worrying about weeks ago. "I'll call him. Just sit down." She eased him onto the couch. He leaned his head back against the leather, his eyes screwed shut, breath hissing through his teeth. His face was ash white. Nora ran to the wall phone in the hallway and slammed the speed dial for the doctor. It rang twice before Miller picked up, his voice thick with sleep. "Miller, it's Nora. Roman's hurt, bleeding from his side. Get here now." She hung up before he could ask questions and ran to the guest bathroom, grabbing 3 thick white towels and the first aid kit Clara kept under the sink. When she ran back to the living room, Roman had managed to shrug off his trench coat. His white shirt was soaked dark crimson on the left side. "Move your hand," Nora ordered, dropping to her knees on the expensive rug. Roman opened his eyes. They were hazy with pain, but they tracked her movements. "You're ruining your suit." "Shut up," she snapped. She grabbed the hem of his shirt and ripped it upward, popping the buttons. The fabric tore, exposing his torso. The wound was just above his hip. It wasn't a bullet hole. It was a jagged, ugly slice. A knife. "A disagreement at the docks," Roman whispered, reading the question in her eyes. "A shipment was light. The buyer took offense." "Did you take offense back?" she asked, pressing a folded towel hard against the wound. Roman flinched, his jaw clamping shut. "The buyer is no longer in a position to negotiate." Nora pressed harder, using her body weight to apply pressure. The blood soaked through the first layer of the towel instantly. Her hands were covered in it. It was warm and horribly slick. She looked up at his face. He was watching her. The mask was completely gone. The untouchable king of the city was just a man bleeding on a couch, his chest heaving under her hands. "You didn't run," he noted. His voice was faint. "I'm on the clock," Nora said, keeping her voice entirely devoid of panic. "You owe me my next paycheck. You don't get to bleed out and skip the bill." The corner of his mouth twitched. Pragmatic. Quiet. Save your strength. They stayed like that for 10 agonizing minutes. The silence in the penthouse was absolute, broken only by his ragged breathing and the rain on the glass. The physical proximity was overwhelming. She could feel the steady, thumping rhythm of his heart through his ribs. She could feel the heat radiating from his skin. For 5 weeks, they had danced around each other. Boss and employee, captor and collateral. They communicated in spreadsheets, nods across the dining table, and brief, sharp debates over gallery acquisitions. But right now, with her hands stained in his blood, the corporate fiction dissolved. The elevator dinged. Miller rushed in, bag in hand, still wearing his pajama pants under a trench coat. He took one look at the scene and immediately dropped to his knees next to Nora. "Move," Miller barked. Nora slid back, letting the doctor take over. She sat back on her heels, her hands resting in her lap, coated in red. "It's deep, but it missed the organs," Miller muttered, working quickly to pack the wound. "You're lucky, Mr. Rossi. Another inch to the left and you'd be looking at a colostomy bag. I need to stitch this." "Do it," Roman said. He didn't look at the doctor. His grey eyes bypassed Miller entirely, locking onto Nora. She sat on the floor, breathing hard, her expensive blazer ruined, her hands shaking slightly now that the immediate crisis was over. She met his gaze. In that look, something fundamental shifted. The debt between them stopped being about money. It became about blood. He had saved her life in the alley. She had just caught him when he fell. The ledger was balanced, but the connection it forged was far more dangerous than any contract they had signed. 3 days passed in a tense, claustrophobic blur. The penthouse smelled of iodine, bitter espresso, and the sharp ozone of the incoming winter storm. Roman was a terrible patient. He refused the heavy painkillers Miller prescribed, opting instead for rigid stoicism and a bottle of bourbon he kept in his desk drawer. He moved slowly, his left arm held tight against his ribs, but he refused to stay in bed. Nora didn't coddle him. She didn't have time. With Roman grounded, the legitimate side of the Rossi empire required a proxy, and she stepped into the void without asking for permission. When the lead contractor for the North End Gallery tried to push back the completion date, citing supply chain issues, Nora didn't panic. She sat across from the man in the penthouse dining room, Carmine standing silently by the door as a visual deterrent. She slid the original contract across the glass table. "The date is the date, Mr. Peterson," Nora said, her voice entirely flat. "If you cannot meet it, we will find a firm that can, and we will hold you liable for the breach. Choose." The contractor swallowed hard, looked at the massive enforcer by the door, and suddenly remembered where he could source the missing materials. Nora wasn't pretending anymore. The persistent, gnawing fear that had defined her entire life in the South End, fear of debt, fear of Tommy's mistakes, fear of the dark alleyways, was gone. In its place was a cold, crystalline focus. She understood this world. It ran on leverage, and for the first time in her life, she was the one holding it. On the fourth night, she found Roman in his study. The room was dark, illuminated only by the amber glow of a desk lamp and the city lights bleeding through the rain-streaked window. Roman was standing by the glass, fully dressed in a black shirt and trousers, leaning heavily on his oak desk for support. He was looking out at the city, a glass of bourbon in his right hand. Nora walked in, the thick carpet absorbing the sound of her footsteps. She set a stack of signed invoices on his desk. Peterson backed down, Nora said. The gallery will open on the 12th. The caterers are confirmed, and the state inspector signed off on the electrical permits this afternoon. Roman didn't turn around. He took a slow sip of his drink. Carmine told me. He said you cornered Peterson so completely, the man practically ran to the elevator. He was trying to inflate his margins by 10%. He thought because I was new, I wouldn't check the line items for the drywall framing. He thought you were a secretary, Roman corrected softly. He finally turned to face her. He looked exhausted. The shadows under his grey eyes were stark against his pale skin. But the predatory edge was still there, sharpened by the pain he was trying to hide. He set his glass down next to the invoices. You saved my life on Thursday, Nora. The blunt admission hung in the quiet room. Nora crossed her arms, suddenly hyper-aware of the space between them. Miller saved your life. I just held a towel. You didn't panic. You didn't run. You didn't leverage my vulnerability to empty the safe and disappear. Roman pushed off the desk, taking a slow, measured step toward her. He favored his right side, his movements stiff. Most of the men on my payroll would have hesitated. You didn't. He stopped 2 feet away, close enough that she could smell the bourbon and the lingering, sterile scent of antiseptic. The debt is cleared, Roman said. Nora froze. Her heart gave a sudden, violent kick against her ribs. What? $25,000 was the price of your brother's mistakes. You paid it out in blood on my living room floor. Roman's voice was low, absolute. He held her gaze, refusing to let her look away. You are not collateral anymore, Nora. You are free. She stared at him. This was the moment she had prayed for in the alley. The chains were gone. She could walk out the steel doors, take the elevator down to the lobby, and vanish into the city. She could get a quiet apartment, find a normal job, and never look over her shoulder again. But as she looked at the man standing in front of her, she felt absolutely nothing for that old life. The diner, the leaky radiator, the constant, suffocating helplessness. It was a graveyard, and she had no desire to be a ghost. No, Nora said. Roman's brow furrowed slightly. A flicker of genuine surprise broke through his iron mask. No, I don't want a clean slate. Nora uncrossed her arms. She took a step forward, completely erasing the safe distance between them. She tilted her head up to look him squarely in the eye. I built the gallery accounts. I know the contractors. I know how this machine works now. If I walk out that door, I go back to being nothing. I am not going back to the bottom. Roman stared at her. The silence stretched, heavy and electric. He looked at the fierce, unyielding set of her jaw, the dark fire in her eyes. She wasn't a survivor clinging to a life raft anymore. She was claiming a seat at the table. Slowly, carefully, Roman reached up with his right hand. He brushed his knuckles against her cheek, right over the spot where Dean's knife had bruised her weeks ago. The bruise was entirely gone. His touch was warm, incredibly gentle for a man who made his living in violence. "If you stay," Roman whispered, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "You don't stay as an employee. You don't stay as a guest. This world will consume you, Nora, and I will not let you go a second time." Nora didn't flinch. She didn't pull away. She leaned slightly into his hand, her pulse hammering a frantic, undeniable rhythm against his skin. She had texted a random number for help, and the devil had answered. But looking at him now, feeling the steady, dangerous anchor of his presence, she realized something terrifying and true. She didn't need to be saved anymore. "I'm not asking you to let me go," Nora said, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. "I'm asking for my office down the hall." Roman's lips parted in a slow, dark smile. It changed his entire face, erasing the cold mob boss and leaving only the man. He slid his hand to the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair, and pulled her in. Done, and that is where our story reaches its turning point. Nora didn't just survive the violent underworld. She learned how to navigate it, claiming her own power by Roman's side. But in a life built on shadows, ruthless enemies, and dangerous secrets, can a bond forged in blood and desperation truly last? Or will the ghosts of their pasts return to collect? If you loved this dark, intense mafia romance, hit that like button and share this video with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon so you never miss a story. What would you do in Nora's place? Walk away to a normal life, or take the empire? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.